Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day 3 at Inkwell Beach. Today is our day of disruption. We're going to get started in just a few minutes.
Good morning.
Hello.
You made it. That's amazing. To the golden hour of attention.
We appreciate the early rise today, especially midweek at Cannes. So, hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Natalie Krupp. I'm the head of holding companies at Microsoft Advertising. Thrilled to be here today with you at Inkwell Beach. And before I formally introduce our guest of honor, I just wanted to start with a statistic that on face value should be shocking, but probably isn't to anybody who works in marketing and advertising. So research shows that consumers spend a minimum of 5 hours per day consuming media. Some studies say as high as 8 to 16 hours a day. Of every 5 hours spent consuming media, an hour and a half is exposure to advertisements. And yet of that hour and a half, only 9 minutes do consumers say they pay any attention to at all. So clearly there's an attention disconnect. And today we're going to begin to discuss what we can do to bridge that gap for a more meaningful and purposeful attention future. So I would love to welcome Chrissy Hansen, CEO of OMD, known to be one of the top experts in the attention economy. Chrissy, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. I know it is a challenge midweek, but I actually quite like the intimacy of this because it allows, I think, a bit more freedom in the discussion we're going to have. I'm a pretty chatty, honest person. So you'll get the history, the journey we've been on, the learnings, I think some of the observations as well, and what feels like a little bit of like we're on a bit of a hype cycle with this word, but we'll kind of unpack that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Why don't we start there? We know that the concept of attention has been discussed by philosophers, scientists, now neuroscientists. What first got you interested in attention and kind of what brought you here on your professional and personal journey?
So that is a big question. I have always wanted to do good in the world, and my journey into media was not one that I dreamed of when I was young. I dreamed of being on the UN, and I dreamed of making the world better. And so I did a law degree, and I studied very hard, but one of the things I failed to research at the time, as I realized when I was 21 and went to apply for jobs, was that to get into the UN at that point, you needed to have ideally been born in certain countries because it was about helping specific areas of child development or agricultural understanding. And my background of being Chinese and American and English was not that helpful, right? And it's right to have had that barrier. And so I went back to the drawing board and was like, well, what do I do with this law degree? And because I don't want to be a lawyer. And I looked at where people spent their time and their money. And if you think about the role that brands played and continue to play, it's this really kind of interesting, almost like altar at which you worship and you invest a huge amount in them, and you use those brands to sort of represent you. So that's what led me into an media career, and I thought at some point I'll do something in this world that makes the decisions around investment better. And so it was actually in the last role I had as a global CSO about 5 years ago when we were creating an end-to-end process that would help our clients make better decisions faster. So safer, more creative, more effective, more efficient, all of the mores, and to grow. And my boss at the time pushed me. He was like, every agency has a process. How does your process actually deliver growth? That is your task. Go. And so, we did a lot of smart work, and we'll come onto that in a little bit on the sort of 6 C's of empathy. But I was like, I think if you understand consumers better than anyone else, then surely there's that ability to drive more compelling experiences would connect to growth, right? And so what I then set upon was like trying to research who we could partner with to deliver upon that. And that kind of circuitous journey is actually what led me to attention, to see how you could understand, would attention connect to brand growth? would there be that link to mental availability, which is a market-based asset, right? And that has a direct correlation to growth. Could you make that leap? Could you go attention to mental availability to market share? And so that was the research we did in 2020 that was positive and conclusive with 2 CPG brands in the US that made that link with Dr. Karen Nelson Field. And it is the thing that triggered the rest of the work for the next 4 or 5 years, around, well, 4 years, around how do you continue to show that, repeat that across multiple categories, and it's been 26 markets now, and over 13, 14 categories, to show that. And then from there, how do you weave that into your process and the work you do? It's a very long answer, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of context as to how we got there.
And we'll have time to unpack all of that and save some time for questions at the end. I know you've called attention the most important thought currency of the 21st century. Can you unpack what you mean by that?
Yeah, so currency is an interesting word. In our industry, we think of it as, often we jump to trading, and I would say we're not there yet, because to trade on it would assume an agreement on partners, platforms, agencies, brands, right, on the mechanism for cost and exchange. But currency, I'm a logophile. That means I'm a lover of words. So if you also look at the meaning of currency, it is a commonly traded way of understanding ideas. And I do think as a thought currency, it's incredibly powerful and important, because your point about our declining levels of attention, that is a problem. That is a problem for the world. That is a problem for our children. I have a 9-year-old, right? I'm acutely aware of the importance of pay attention to me, to those around you, look at them, give them respect, hear the ideas, think, consider, right? If you ever do rock climbing, one of the things they say to you is, you will pay attention or you will fall off, right? Right. And so there are some sort of fundamentals in your everyday life, and yet we've almost become, oh, the attention span's shrunk. Oof, gosh. That's a bad thing. And so that's why I think the greater knowledge that we have around the word and its broader implication means it's the most important thought currency if you commit to it and do something about it and recognize how it can do greater good if you are purposeful in what you do and actionable, right? I don't want to just say intentional, because intention is great, but what do you do with it is so key.
I think that reflects the title of the session really well, Attention with Purpose. So when we take that with purpose statement, what specifically does that mean to you on topics like inclusion, like empathy?
Okay, so let's take one at a time. The word empathy is an interesting one. If you go back to the last couple of cans, you'll have found it was a big, big trending word. It hasn't been this year, has it? No. Doesn't mean it's not important. It's probably more important than ever. There was just a vogue moment of it. And that was irritating to me, because the beating heart of our end-to-end process is empathy. When we say we design for better experiences, we do 4 things. We understand the ambition of the brand, we seek to understand consumers better than anyone else through the lens of empathy, and we look at data signals in that way. We think about how we craft, right, how we make the media and the kind of context and the platforms and the context of the frequency meaningful, and we think about activation. And so we would say we seek to be empathetic in the work. And we are intentional in that, because every brief should go, how do I answer that ambition? How do I look at the data signals that are available through that lens? And that's a piece of like real rigor, because when I first talked about it, I got pushback, and I get it, because in common language we would say empathy is he or she has an empathy gap, or they're missing a chip or something, right? And in media, what I'm trying to say is, what's the specific signal? And the signals that we use would be, you have your content. What is the context at which you place it? What is the contact that you use? That's your frequency learnings. What is your construct? So the size and the shape of the ad and how it's optimized on the screen. if your brand is so fortunate as to have drivers of choice data, that's your comms imperative. And then, could we ever get to cultural signals? That's a current brief I have to the teams. Like, you need to figure that out, because it's not enough to tell me. I can tell you a definition in the dictionary, right? You know, agreed behaviors, codes, and norms. I can't do anything with that. And if they come back and say, we tried and we couldn't, oh, that's fine. But so everything you do, you should do with purpose, because if I was a client and I had advertising dollars, my expectation is my agency is treating every dollar I spend with huge care, right? And thoughtfulness and great purpose in that. So that's the piece around empathy with purpose, and how do you weave that into every decision you make. And we actually do have a version of our process, which is frankly attention by design, which goes even harder on the signals of empathy for those clients that seek that. You gave me a second word.
Well, the second word was inclusion.
Okay, yes.
And I think part of why we focus on it is our marketing with purpose research. We actually looked at different ad copy being less to more inclusive among Gen Zs, 18 to 24-year-olds in this study, and saw that the most inclusive advertising, this was for a Tommy Hilfiger campaign, drove a 23-point lift in purchase intent. And I think what was striking to us that we had talked about is this lift occurred even though 10% of everyone exposed said that they felt personally represented in the ad. Yes. So we began to saw the indicators that the more inclusive you can be, it goes beyond the group you are trying to represent, and wonder if you've approached it similarly or you have.
So So part of me wants to go, oh, I'm so surprised by that. Right? Ads that look like me, I resonate with more. Of course. Yeah. Right? And it's a good thing. And so the work we've done has shown with one of the platforms, it's 1.4 times, right, more effective in terms of the outcomes. It's an intuitive expectation. And so you then go, okay, now we have increasing amounts of objective information and evidence. What does it mean for the process that we use to craft that content, right? And so actually I was in the Palais yesterday, and TBWA did a really cool session on inclusive by design, of how they bring inclusivity into the way they craft their content, right? And I love that, because if you are not purposeful in every single brief, and what we do, and this happened even last week, I'll ask who worked on that brief. And if you tell me it's 3 guys, I'll probably ask you to go and do it again, right? Because, and it's not because they intended for that, but they just went, well, these 3 are available. And you have to kind of go back in and say, okay, let's have a look at the composition of those answering the points, because your ideas they should be more representative, but it still requires the prompts, right? So, and those prompts would be things like, when you're defining the audience, what are you growing, expanding, diversifying? Then you click down into the show me the audiences. What does that map look like? Where are you playing in the experience? And that practice that we have of asking those questions and pushes, and actually being able to switch up and deepen the questions, helps teams when they are inevitably moving really quickly, right, to go, okay, how do I ensure that I am being inclusive with purpose every time, so that it becomes muscle memory over time, right? Because it's muscle memory for some of us. If you are often the person who looks different or feels different, you look at a scene and you see it straight away, you go, But if you're not, if that's not your upbringing, then you need a little bit more support to make that more of your muscle memory. So you look at a situation and you go, okay, this is what we need to switch up in this meeting, and let's change the composite or reschedule until we have the right mix of people.
Makes sense. I know another angle on diversity you and I started talking about is neurodiversity.
Yep.
Some children who are neurodiverse, and it's just we're so much more increasingly aware of it these days. How are the nuances of neurodiversity being contemplated now with attention with purpose?
Yeah. So there are generally three ways you can measure for attention, right? If attention is there are a number of definitions, but if you say it's the ability to switch your focus on a specific stimulus at will, the three different ways that you can observe it, one is a little more challenging because of the cost, but it's galvanic response, right? So, and also brain waves, so sweat glands, heart rate, right? But it's very individual and it costs quite a lot. The second is around kind of your JavaScript, and then the third is around gaze models. None of those is perfect, right? But if you take one of them, like a gaze model, so am I looking at the ad? There's something called saccades or just the tiny micro changes that your eyes make. That is done at the individual level. So depending on the advances of the technology, you can record that or see that and pick up neurodiverse readings. The way the researcher would look at it, they'd have to be briefed to look for it, right? But they would see it, but it would pick up as an outlier, and then you would cluster the number of outliers, right, and then quantify that. So that technology exists today, and I'm glad you asked the question yesterday morning because I double-checked with two CEOs on the space, and they're, no, Chrissy, it's possible. And I was like, okay, thank you. But if you hadn't asked me the question, it wouldn't have been top of mind for me, right? And that's a really important piece because it needs to go into the brief that asks for it next time we get a reading that says, can I see the volume of difference? But also then can we make sure when we recruit for panels, we think about that and incorporate that too.
Can tell it's your passion point by doing Homework Can Week.
I know, that's why I don't party. And I wish I did.
We already touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about any other methods, either traditional long-standing or newer, novel, cutting edge around measurement of attention? How close are we to getting that right? Where do we need to go in order to really have the best way to measure this?
I think I see two tracks in measurement, in attention. The first track, and could use the three areas I talked about, gaze or JavaScript or a combination of those, as different organizations and clients and platforms, almost like they set their own a baseline and get more familiar and understand how to use this metric and what it might change or require you to switch out. That takes time, right? I actually did a little bit of research into our own network to see how early our very first test began. It began before I was in my last role, and it was 2016, and it was one of the Nordics markets. They did their very first test. And then there was another test in 17 and 18. And so, look, we're here, 2023, and we're pretty good and rigorous at operationalizing. When we say we're going to do something in our network, we do it. But you're still taking your clients on a journey to get comfortable with that, almost like that baseline piece. The more advanced areas of measurement are already happening, and we work with those as well, which looks at emotion, memory, implicit association. And what's interesting about those sort of partners and providers and researchers, they would say, Chrissy, attention only is like the start point, right? Looking at something is literally your start point. It's everything else you do after that we need to think about. And I go, yes, and let's keep doing that research as well, but make sure that if we throw all of that, just remember, if you throw that on people too quickly, a reaction can be, it's just too much. I'm just going to go back to viewability. This is all a bit much, right? And I don't want that to happen. But it is fascinating because as people get more comfortable with measurement and that ability to kind of harmonize different pieces, what you're able to do is to look at the end result and work backwards from it and go, if my goal is purchase or conversion, what do I need to have done to get to that point? And from a creative perspective, if I'm able to understand or see different emotional responses, what can I do around pre-testing? What can I do during the experience? Chrissy really likes pink fish, right? So if you're showing me something, maybe you would go, she's popping out of the experience. Oh no, bring in the pink fish, right? Or some other
pink
thing.
wine here
Pink wine.
would be
Yeah.
more appropriate.
Yeah, that might be it as well.
So we've talked about attention so much already today, and one thing I like to do is be a little provocative and challenge industry assumptions. And when we were talking, it was so revelatory for me to understand your opinion on attention harvesting. And I think there is such a pervasive thought that more attention is better, right? We want more attention as marketers. It's what we're seeking out. And I know that you have a unique point of view on this, and I would love for you to share it with the group today.
Yeah, I'm a hard no on harvesting. I think it's our responsibility to respect consumers, to respect their time, and to know them and say what is right. So if I'm tired and I need a cup of coffee, you don't need to tell me about the provenance of the beans or the soil or how a coffee is made. You just tell me where it is. You probably do that in a second, and that's good. That's a good amount of money you've just spent on me. If I've been diagnosed with diabetes, you probably want to spend more time with me. It would be irresponsible to expect me to make a decision on 2 seconds or 3 seconds. And so what we did, and we actually announced it last July, we built an attention requirement calculator, which is understanding the brand, the category, the life stage, the audience, and how much time is required to convey the right amount of information that drives mental availability and choice. And that is an important benefit for procurement clients, because every client wants to do either more with the same or more with less. And actually media pricing and inflation was, I think, the 7th most important marketing priority in the last WFA count in 2020, at the end of 22. And if you unpack that, why? Well, because my dollars are finite, what can I do? And I would say, well then, making sure you're delivering the right experience is how you do that. And I think if you take the financial aspect of non-harvesting, you see that benefit. But if you then look at the societal perspective, which is how do you ensure a better ecosystem, you do that by only taking the right amount of time. And then if you're delivering experience that's truly valuable, then we start to have better performing campaigns, right? And then you have children like mine that maybe one day will love advertising.
I love that rethink on it. It's absolutely spot on. We were talking before about that famous quote. I don't know if you've heard it, but half of my marketing is wasted. I just don't know which half. And I looked that up, and John Wanamaker, the forefather of marketing, is the one who said it, and he said it around 1900.
Yeah.
So we've been dealing with this for well over 100 years, and I think your take on really only taking what is necessary instead of the do more with less, it's really about the waste less. To me, I thought that was such a interesting and provocative answer, because really helps move us towards what you call the net positive attention ecosystem.
Yes, because it's also a good lesson for life. Just use what's needed, right? And for me, I think we can move to a net positive space, a space where you take responsibility for the messages you produce. You take responsibility for the images you put in the world. You seek to be more representative and positive and thoughtful in that. And so when you look at the work that wins at the Palais, yes, there has been a marked shift, and I like it, right? And there's the debate, is the swing too hard to sustainability? I think you can do both, right? I think you can be entertaining and positive and thoughtful and respectful, and there's a reason for it. It's because people care, right? They are making increasing decisions based on values, and it's how brands continue to be relevant and reinvent themselves. There are a number of categories, and there was one session on the Monday where one CMO was sharing that in his category, the average lifespan of the product is 3 to 5 years. But his brand had lived for nearly 70. And so how did they do that? It was being based on values and remembering and going back to the core. And in their case, it was around female empowerment. And so I kind of loved that sort of lesson and that reminder.
Now, how do you marry that thought to what is clearly the largest theme of this week's conference around artificial intelligence? You and I started scratching the surface of what is generative AI and what does AI kind of mean in a world where we're trying to move to this net positive future for attention?
So I think I'm excited by the opportunities that AI is presenting to us. Like in healthcare, it's personalized healthcare, awesome. I'm excited in my heart, I'm a writer. I just never quite find the time to write as much as I want. But what's exciting is you go, okay, you could do almost like the first draft on things for me and then give me the time to shape and edit and refine. When it comes to imagery and the sourcing of that imagery, I think it's important to note the innate bias that can exist in the pulling of that, right? Because what generative AI is doing is you give it a series of prompts, and however intelligent you are with the prompts and creative, you get to some really exciting outputs. Remember what might have been the source of those original images, and if they were missing or not as fully representative, you are building on top of incomplete banks of potential assets and images. And so this is where the area of, I think, ethics and responsibility starts to really come to the fore. And it will, ethics in business will be with us for easily the next 20, 30 years. And we are just on the forefront of understanding how to define it and having the right language for it. So as always, I'm a yes and. I'm really excited. I think it's hugely, has huge benefits. And I go, there's a lot to quickly think through. And I think as mainly women in the audience, we have to lean into it and really learn it and get comfortable with it and drive the directions that are taken with it, and the guardrails and the frameworks and the kind of considerations so that it is reflective of the world that we seek to live in.
That makes sense. And I think hearing you talk, when you talk about benefits, it's so nice to see the duality between the consumer benefits from the problem definition we defined at the beginning to the actual return on ad spend.
Yes.
And the benefits you'll get from the advertiser point of view. Yeah. So I guess to start to close this out, what advice would you give to brands that are just beginning their journey of attention with purpose?
There is a lot of material today that a brand or team can start to read, watch, absorb. You just begin by beginning, right? It just starts there. I would also say if there have been tests done and they're in another category, get comfortable with not feeling you have to always do every test for yourself. So one of the things we do in our network is we say to our clients, we'll always respect the privacy and the kind of individual sensitive information, but at an overarching category level, we will share these findings with you because you don't have the dollars to test every single thing, right? And you don't need to. If these questions have been answered across 26 countries, there's a pattern, you should be okay with the pattern and lean into that and take that advantage. So it begins by just beginning, but know that it's hard work. And that's probably why it will take a couple more years before attention becomes anywhere near a trading currency, because you need to have the panel size that is robust enough. And in the US, particularly around TV, right? If you're going to say, I'm going to link attention to outcomes, to be responsible, the panel size is important. But you could use it for planning today. There's enough information already that would sharpen a significant part of the process. So you lean in, you learn, you commit to doing it with rigor. You accept that it's harder work because you do two plans. You do the plan you did before, then you do the attention adjusted plan. Then you probably have to get your marketing science and intelligence team to then measure it so that your internal organization feels comfortable with the switch that will be made. You do that for a year, you set a baseline, then you have the conversation with procurement that says, are we comfortable with building this into how we might be remunerated, or do you want to take a second year? But you have to operationalize these things, otherwise time moves past, right? And then we're here and it's 2025, and Chrissy's back on stage, and we're like, where do we get to? And I'm like, I don't know, you tell me.
Well, that was going to be my last question, is when we're back on stage next year, maybe at a slightly later time slot.
Yes, yep.
For the people that went out late. What will we be talking about? How far do you think attention will have progressed?
I don't think it will have, I think the knowledge will have progressed a little bit more. I think some of us will have taken the faster signals I talked about earlier and will have done those tests. We will have done those tests, right? And so you're gonna see almost like two speeds of movement. Those who are comfortable moving forward, getting on with it, and then others that go, we need the whole industry to move with us.
Right.
And I think if you do that, you sort of miss the boat. I only have hopes for what I hear next year. I'm not in the, listen, if I was in the prediction game, I'd be on an island, right?
Find the casino nearby.
Yeah, or be writing a book. So I have hopes, right? I think not next year, but maybe the year after, maybe we'll start to really talk about ethics in business. I don't think we're doing that right now, because I don't think people quite have the kind of comfort with the language, right? You kind of know you need to do it, but you don't know really how to begin. And unless you did a moral theory and applied ethics course in college, I did that, but I still don't feel totally equipped to talk about this topic. And so that's why we're doing training sessions with one of our sister agencies to kind of get really comfortable with it. I think maybe in 2 years' time, that's a topic there. Next year, maybe it's the updates on where generative AI took us. Maybe there's a little bit more in legislation. You know, we'll see.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much. There's please.
Thank you for coming.
And we do have a few moments for any follow-up questions from the audience.
Did you know morning is meant to be the golden hour of attention for adults? That is a true thing. That is a true thing. And yet. Yes, Brianna.
So my question might not be directly related to the attention purpose element, but as a strong female leader, you mentioned we have this like.
We're going to give you the mic.
Yeah, do you want the microphone? Thank you.
Having my Beyonce moment. This might be a little bit away from the attention piece, but as a strong female leader, you did make mention of this like moment in time that we have with generative AI, and how it makes me think about the privilege that some individuals may have in having access to learning about it and being able to progress in their professional development with this. While I also notice the lack of empathy in this current can, while we are very focused on AI, you know, Microsoft particularly. So how are you thinking about holding your teams accountable, or how we can hold our teams accountable to be authentic with the empathy while still moving forward with the generative AI, and making sure that those that are learning it and building it are also of those diverse perspectives?
That's a hard question. I get very involved with my teams. It's not always easy for them. I know that. They told me that. But I know our product inside out. I know our process inside out. I know our vision inside out. I wrote it. And so I hold a mirror up to them on an individual level, and then in group settings, and I do it regularly. So that's my thing. When there's a pitch, I will ask, who worked on this before it moves to the next stage? Who answered this brief? First round pitch on a page. Who was in that? And if it's what I said before, then I'm like, do it again, right? Because if you stop yourself, you won't have to do as much work for me, right? If you were more inclusive from the start, then life is a little easier. And with my female leaders in particular, I do push them. And I will say, you've got to do this. You've got to lean into this. I will drop something else from your plate. But generative AI, and you try and model behavior, right? So I was like giving it questions about write a script, write a song, write a this, write a that, do this. And you make it less daunting, right? And you show that. I haven't figured out a faster way to drive change apart from just doing it and working with your leaders. And then I say to them, I spend a lot of time with you. I hope you are paying this forward. So tell me the next time we have a conversation, who are the 2 or 3 people you did pay it forward to? And sometimes they don't even think about it. They're like, oh my God, I didn't. And I'm like, that's okay. Now we've had the conversation. It's really important because I can't do that with everyone, right? There's 2,400 people in the US at OMD. And so if I spend a lot of time with a small group of you, you must do the same, and they must do the same, and they must do the same. And I think I'm really clear with my values. And the team shares them. It's the behavior you have to remember. You can't just say it. You have to practice it and keep doing it and do the boring stuff of like, who was in the brief? Tell me this. Show me this. Let's see the ideas, right? And it's really hard work. But I'm really open. If other people go, there's a better way, there's a faster way, I'm all in. I am all in. I just haven't figured out what that is, like to scale that beyond the really honest conversation.
I'm going to steal the pay it forward point and say, Chrissy says you have to
Yeah,
do
you
this.
have to.
Yeah.
You have to, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a bit like when, return to office. And spending a little, I know, I went there, right? But even if you go in one day, you've got to teach people in the same way that you were taught. I had such great teachers, also some really tough teachers, but I learned from all of it, and that was in person. And so I say to the leaders, you've got to do that. You have to give back what got you here in terms of that time, because it has to be done physically, some of it. Mm-hmm. We're still social people in the same way that you want your children in a physical school, right? You don't stop learning at the age of 18 when you finish school, or 21 or 22 from college, or whenever you finish. You still need that physical peace and in presence, and to be able to read expression and emotion and reaction, and you can't quite do that. I'm very good at controlling my facial expressions on a screen. It's a little harder in person, and my team have really learned to read my face in person, right? They're like, oh no. But that's a skill, right? So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
No? All right.
Chrissy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest
The
of
rest
Cannes,
of your
everybody.
can be beautiful.
That was not a push to get you guys off. I was saying I have something to say. Mubashara, please bring me the mic. No, I'm kidding. No, but I was going to say that, I'm the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Fleischman Hillard. And so to the idea of it takes time, and this is a movement in terms of building empathy and inclusion, and the accountability piece is such a key thing in it, but it's practiced behavior. And I love the idea of making your people pay it forward, and if they don't pay it forward, perhaps they should move forward, right? So it has to be a part of how they get rewarded in terms of how they're building teams. And this business of DE&I is so complicated. This business of inclusion is so complicated that I think sometimes we have to shift our mindset and heart set, and I think that's sort of what you're talking about. Even with AI, let's play with it, let's train it, let's ask another question, let's push a little harder to make it into a space that we're shifting the narrative of what it actually looks like. So I look forward to having you back in 2024 and 2025.
Okay, you can check my operationalizing of it.
Exactly. So again, thank you guys so much. This has been a disruptive conversation. Today is our day of disruption. This is Wednesday, the middle of the week, and you powered through this early morning session. and it's a day of disruption that no one would want to meet. So I cannot be, I just don't even know how honored I am. I'm so honored just to have you kick off this day of disruption for us. The rest of the day is just, going to just amplify with the energy that you set for us now. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yay.